I think both the dogs just fell asleep, so this might be perfect timing. Although there's a storm rolling in, so the lighting might go kaput here any second. Time is of the essence. Let's do this thing. Welcome back to another pizza party. I'm Mrs. Pizza. That is Cheese. And Winnie's on the floor behind the camera, so if she decides to get up at any point in time, it's going to move. Oh well. She's comfy and we're not moving her. And today we are here to do another recent reads. Why? Because if I wait too long, it's too many books and it's overwhelming. So I like to do this while it's not. How about that? I like to do it while it's not overwhelming. So let's talk about some books I've read recently. The first book we are going to talk about, that was a big huff. The first book we are going to talk about is Seduction of a Psychopomp, Erogenous Handholding, and Other Ways to Tame Your Reaper. And this is by Elsie Winters. This is available on KU if you're interested, and is the third full-length installment in the, I don't remember the name of this series. I want to say Borderlands, but I don't know why. This is our final full-length installment in this group of friends. The first book is Levianthan Song. The second book is Magpies and Mayhem. And we now have our blah, 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 erogenous handholding. Very long title book. I was really, really excited about this book. This was one of my most anticipated fantasy romance reads of this spring. I'm so glad I read it because this was a really sweet story. If you're looking for a cozy fantasy romance, this fits the bill. This is the story of Grim, and he has been introduced in our previous books. He is a Grim Reaper. He's about 7 feet tall, super dark and mysterious, and has an extremely strong form of magic. In previous books, we have also learned that Grim is a little bit of a softie. He does some very sweet and sentimental things when he doesn't think anyone's paying attention, or kind of will slide someone a present that's so thoughtful and sweet. So I was very excited to get to his book. In this book, Grim is summoned back home by the matriarch of the family, his grandmother. Now, Reapers are ageless, or not really ageless so much as immortal, so they reach a certain point and they just kind of stop aging. So everybody kind of looks like an adult. Well, that's a weird way to put it. Everyone looks like they're probably in their mid to late 20s, but, are hundreds and hundreds of years old. His grandmother is no exception. She summons him back home and she says, "Hey, Grim, it's time to get married and I've got somebody special for you." Now, Grims take getting married very, very seriously because they live so long and there's a whole bonding process involved. But the reason he has been given the opportunity to be in an arranged marriage is because his future bride is a fae princess in another realm and she's dying. She's sick, but his magic can save her. So, of course, Grim, being the big softie that he is, decides, okay, I'll marry her. Sounds good. Arranged marriage situation happens. Or we'll call it marriage of convenience as well, because I feel like sometimes those tropes kind of work together. Celeste marries Grim, Grim marries Celeste, and then these two basically spend the rest of the book getting to know each other. Grim is much more reserved and worried about Celeste being well, getting better, while Celeste is worried about seducing her husband because he's so sweet, he's taking too long, and she just can't stand it anymore. This is a really sweet story. I really, really enjoyed it, and I'm glad I got to finish off this friend group in this series, and I really hope Elsie Winters writes some more books in this world, because I've really, really enjoyed all of them. Of all of the books, this is the one that felt the most fantasy, or I should say traditional fantasy romance, because not much of it takes place in the human world. The next book I picked up after that was another fantasy romance, another one also available on KU if you're interested, and that was the Stoneheart Bride, and this is in the Deadlands series by Kati Wilde. I picked this one up because it's about 57 pages and I wanted something that was a little palate cleanser that was super short. This is the story of Flora, and we open this story, how I'll put this is you kind of open the story after the third act breakup of a traditional fantasy romance. See, Flora has been captured by some orcs, and we open this story with her tied up and about to be cooked for dinner. She has had a rough go of it. See, just before this happened, Flora's heart was broken because her uncle, who is king, offered her as a wife to someone that Flora thought had feelings for her. Now, he's very quiet and reserved, but she she thought she saw glimpses of something there, and they had become good friends and had some good banter. But when he was offered Flora as a bride, he said no. Flora is heartbroken, and she's also tied up and about to be eaten for dinner, when suddenly someone comes to the rescue. I really enjoyed this. I think my biggest complaint with it is that it was so short, but that's exactly what I was looking for, so how can I complain? I think I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I really wanted to go back and get all of the Flora and banter and the before times that we don't get because we're starting the book after the third act breakup. So there is no third act breakup in this because it already happened previously in the world before this book happened. The next book I picked up after that, I actually got on loan from the library as an audiobook, and that was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I had read Babel by this author previously, but was interested when I heard kind of the synopsis of this book. This is the story of June, and June has a friend named Athena. June and Athena are both writers, but Athena has been wildly successful, and June has just kind of eked by. She hasn't had any real success. So, frenemies, there's a lot of jealousy there. Well, one day, June and Athena are out having a good time. They head back to Athena's apartment. Athena shows June this manuscript for this book that she's been working on for a very, very long time, and she's finally finished the first draft. But no one other than June now knows it exists. And then suddenly, accident happens, and Athena dies. Now, June, before calling the police, stashes the manuscript, and then, sometime later, decides to pass it off as her own. Drama ensues. I picked this book up because it said it was a satire and kind of a commentary on the publishing industry and a lot of other things having to do with that. Also, the book community and just being online and talking about books and all of the different social media aspects. I found this book, although it was fine, I enjoyed parts of it, but I feel like a lot of the things that were explored were just kind of like surface level explored. Maybe that's because our main character, June, she's just the worst. And she's supposed to be, you're not supposed to like her. She's horrible, but sometimes I felt like, I don't even know how to articulate how I felt really about this book. I think I was disappointed in how surface level some things were explored, while some of these things are really important to be discussed. Other things were delved into a little deeper, but for the most part, this was fine. It was just fine. I think a lot of the things that were talked about are probably something that the author herself, R.F. Kuang, has perhaps experienced, or that's how it came across. And a lot of the commentary on things is important. We're supposed to be talking about these things. They should be talked about, but I don't think I was necessarily impressed by how deep the book went. That's how I'll put it. Also, June is the worst, and I hated being in her head. She's awful. She's just awful. I know she's supposed to be awful, but she's so awful. The next book I picked up after that, it's part of a series, and I have the rest of it here. Hold, please. I read, gotta get this whole stack of buddies out of here. I read Grimm and Barrett by Juliette Cross. This is the final book in the Stay a Spell series by this author. All of these books are available on KU. I've just been getting my money's worth out of KU recently. The first book in the series is Wolf Gone Wilde, and I absolutely had the best time reading this. The rest of the books pale in comparison to this, and I've kind of been disappointed by the way the series has gone. I think I ended up giving this like 4.5 stars. This is the story of a witch and a werewolf, but the werewolf has been cursed, and so he can hear, like while he's in his man form, he can hear his werewolf form, like talking to him inside his head. There's like a commentary going on. It's hilarious. I really, really enjoyed this. There was also a like very Charmed, like that TV show Charmed, like that's how the witchy family felt. And each book since has followed a different witch sister in the family, and they all have different abilities. We have Don't Hex and Drive, which is one of the sisters who's a witch, and she, I believe, is a healing witch, and a vampire. Witches Get Stitches, which is one of the witchy sisters who can see the future and also is a tattoo artist, and a werewolf again. always practice safe hacks, and this is one of our sisters and another creature that is introduced in this world called a Grimm. Now, the reason that I skipped the next book is because none of these ones really entertained me as much as the first one did. I found them all a little flat, and relying on the book before to set up a lot of the relationships that were explored in here. I think my favorite of all of the, aside from the first one, I liked this one. And so this sister's twin has had a kind of crush on one of the other Grimms that I believe is introduced in the first book. And you've been wondering since book 1 when we're going to get to that romance. That is Grimm and Barrett. In between these books and that book is another book that's between one of the witch sisters and a vampire that is set up in the first book as well. I wasn't interested in that one, so I went ahead and skipped it and went to this one. And unfortunately, this one didn't hit the mark for me either. This was like a 2.5. A lot of the setup and like different fun things about will they ever realize they have crushes on each other between Clara and Henry, our witch, and our Grimm happen in previous books. So by the time you get to this book, they kind of get together almost immediately and then stuff happens. Unfortunately, I just think that each individual book couldn't stand on its own, but yet tries to. In this book too, they must have mentioned like 10 times that it's like Reuben and Jules is the book I skipped, the vampire and the witch. And they must have gone to England for their book because it was mentioned like 10 times. Every time someone mentioned Jules and Reuben, someone said, oh, it was like recap, like, oh, did you mention that they're in England right now? Like I was expecting in real life for someone to just like pop up and be like, did you know Jules and Reuben are in England right now? While I was like out getting coffee. It was so shoehorned into moments. We kept going places that weren't important just to bring it up that they weren't there. This series kind of petered out for me as it went along. I think if you like that charmed vibes with witch and werewolf, read this one and stop there. Unless you really get invested in the world and you want to continue. But no, this is the best book in the entire series. The next book I picked up after that one was To Charm a Dark Prince. And this was Baby's first arc. I actually got this through NetGalley and I was really excited. This is by Kathryn and Kingsley and I had read from this author before. This is a fantasy romance now currently available and is on KU. And this is Arthurian legend themed a little bit. We have our main character Gwen, and she exists on Earth in the real world, and she lives in Kansas, and she's 19 years old, and everybody has moved on with their life, and she's just stuck in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. Well, she has this cat named Merlin that showed up quite some time ago, and he looks mangy and awful, and just kind of hates everybody. He sounds like an awful cat, but she keeps feeding him and taking care of him. Well, one day when her parents are out of town, Merlin kicks over a candle, starts a fire, and then opens up a portal to another dimension that Gwen falls through. We've now entered our fantasy world. Gwen wakes up in a fantasy land with suddenly magical powers and is trying to evade this dark prince that rules over this land. Well, this land used to have a lot of magic, and this dark prince basically imprisoned every single person in this land that has any sort of magic in this big dark crystal in his castle. So she doesn't want to get caught because she doesn't want to get put in the dark crystal. And the only one she's got around telling her what's going on is this cat of hers that seems a little suspicious. Is he a cat? He's suspicious. I ended up giving this a 3.5 stars. I had a really good time with it, and I think I would continue reading. My only kind of like cons I would say about this book is I felt like Gwen's only characteristics were she was a normal girl from Kansas, and they mentioned that she liked animals. Why? Because she fed a cat? Like, I don't know. Also, it just kind of felt like she didn't have much to do other than but suddenly, it was the Twilight curse where like she's just kind of such a nothing, but everyone thinks she's just the greatest and the most beautiful and attractive and sexiest thing they've ever seen. I did, however, really enjoy our villain. He was super morally gray. Well, not even that. He's the bad guy, but he's honest about why he's the bad guy. You understand why he's the bad guy, and he doesn't make any apologies for it. He thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's willing to be the bad guy to do the right thing. Gwyn has some really funny one-liners, and that's why I think I would continue on with this. I think her character will gain more agency as this goes on, but it was fun. It was a good time. It was baby's first arc, you know? I read an arc. I feel like a real reader. The next book I picked up after that, I got on audiobook from the library, and that is Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. This is the first book in her Hot and Hammered series, and I have read some Tessa Bailey books in the past, and this was one that was like an earlier series of hers. This is the story of Georgie, and she is the youngest in her family, and no one takes her seriously. I mean, it doesn't help that for a living she's a party clown, but like, you know, that's neither here nor there. Somebody's got to be the party clown, right? Also, in her small hometown is a former professional baseball player who has recently had to quit his career because of an injury, and he's ended up back in his small hometown, and he's not really mentally handling it well. His name is Travis. Well, Georgie has been in love with Travis since she was just a little kid in braces watching him from the stands, but Travis has no idea, and Georgie and Travis end up fake dating for reasons, and this was fine. I ended up giving this 3 stars, but I feel like that was a little bit generous, judging by the amount of time it took me to get through this. I found that I was picking up anything other than this. It was just kind of a meh story, like just meh. But it had that Tessa Bailey, here's what I'll say. Tessa Bailey does spicy, dirty talk, especially from her male main characters, like nobody else. If that is something that you are looking for in your romance stories, Tessa Bailey's your girl. But this story in general just didn't have any oomph. I felt like I didn't really care about Georgie and Travis, and the spicy scenes were fine. It was fine. The next book I picked up after that was another fantasy romance, because apparently I was on a roll. This one is also available on Kindle Unlimited, and that was Strike by Abigail Kelly. This is from the new Protectorate series. I had read one book from this series and really enjoyed it and decided to pick up another one. They're short and easy to get through. I picked up this one, and this is a story of, I believe it's pronounced Hale, but she is an elemental, and she at one point in her existence was basically like a thunderstorm or lightning or something like that. But one day, through sheer will, she gave herself a body. She personified the heck out of herself. So she fell down to earth, and while she was falling, was rescued, captured midair by a dragon. Well, technically a dragon shifter, and his name is Vale. Hale has been living with the dragons since then, learning to be how to person. Learning to be how to person. It would help if I could talk and then I could learn how to be a person. She has been learning how to be a person. She's learned to read, and she's exceptionally fast at learning language, and she's learning about social cues, and basically she's a full-blown adult, but she's had to start off from literally knowing nothing. And it's been, I think, a couple of years. It's been like 4 years, and she's decided it's time for her to take a mate, and she has chosen Vale. But when she tells him she has chosen him, it doesn't go so well. This doesn't have a third act breakup, as it's kind of has like a first act breakup. But basically, this is the story of Hale and Vale trying to figure it out. This was super sweet. I really liked it. It was a good time. And I guess at this point, I've liked both books I've read in this series. Also, Vale is a dragon shifter, but I felt like because I hadn't read books before this, there wasn't too much time spent on explaining that he was a dragon shifter, because they kept calling him a dragon. And I was like, is he just like a giant dragon walking around? Because I don't know how anatomically that is going to work. Dragon shifter. And the last book we are going to talk about is, surprise, surprise, not a fantasy romance. I know. Also, I don't think it's available on KU. We're just taking a hard right. And that is Raw Dog, The Naked Truth About Hot Dogs. This is by Jamie Loftus, and I'm going to be 100% honest. I picked this book because of the cover. It was available at my library as an audiobook, and I said, who wouldn't want to read that? That sounds ridiculous. So yes, this is about hot dogs, but it's also about the meat industry. It's about taking a road trip in 2021 where the world was pretending, or at least most of the United States was pretending, that COVID didn't exist anymore, even though it very much did. This is about hot dog eating competitions. This is about the hot dog corporations as a whole. And this is also about weirdly gendered pickles, which I still haven't Googled, but like seemed just as inappropriate and weird and intriguing as the author described them. I had a really good time with this. I had no expectations because I was totally just like, yeah, let's learn about hot dogs. This author, I believe, has a podcast and is a stand-up comedian or something like that. And so listening to her do her own audiobook was a riot. It was really fun. Now, will I ever eat a hot dog again after this? Probably not. It'll put you right off of it. It'll make you rethink eating meat in general. But it was a fun kind of just random commentary that on these bits and pieces of things. And I learned about hot dogs. I ended up giving this 4 stars. And if you are the least bit interested, it was a weird and wild ride, but I'm glad I took it. And that, kids, is where we are going to end this pizza party. 8 is a good number. Are you going to get up right now? Where's Winnie? In case you were wondering, there she is. Bye, Weenie. That bed does look more comfortable, doesn't it? If you had fun hanging out with me and the dogs, please subscribe. I hope you're reading good books out there, wherever you are. And I'll see you next time.